Hi everyone, welcome to online activity 8 on globalization and the environment. I hope you've watched the online lecture 8 on globalization and the environment already, because it's going to give you some of the input that you're going to need for this activity. This activity will take you briefly through a new concept, and then it will give you tasks to complete in your online forums on Learn and on Moodle. So let's get started. Now, what are we going to look at today? We're going to look at the concept of global public goods, and we're specifically going to look at them in the context of the environment. And we're going to look at a case study of the logging and the fires in the Amazon, particularly in Brazil, that happened every year, but it happened even more last year and this year. They were particularly in the news last year. This year, obviously, with coronavirus and with everything that is happening in the US, not many of the fires made it into like headlines, but there are fires in the Amazon rainforest every year, and they raise the debate around global public goods. Now, quickly going to introduce you to the concept. Basically, before we start talking about global public goods, we need to look at what a private good is and what a public good is, right? Now, a private good is what we're all used to. A private good can be anything, like a pair of jeans, like a pizza, a car, a house, anything. Private goods are typically goods that are traded in markets, right? And there is a buyer and there is a seller, and they usually agree on a price. And with the action of buying, the ownership of the good is transferred to the buyer, right? So if I buy a new car, that car belongs to me after I've bought it. If I buy a new house, that house belongs to me afterwards, right? So it's a typical concept. The private good is pretty much what we usually understand by a good, right? Now, what is particular about private goods, and we intuitively know this, right, is that they're excludable. So they have clearly identified owners. So if I buy a car, that car is mine and not my neighbors and not my husband's, not my friends, right? And also they're rival. So if it's my car, it can't be someone else's car, right? And if I'm using it, my neighbor can't use it at the same time, right? Or if I'm eating the pizza, then someone else can't eat the exact same part of the same pizza, right? This is just as an example. But basically, most of our goods are private goods because we buy them, we sell them, they're excludable, and they are rival, right? Now, a public good is pretty much has the opposite qualities than a private good. So generally, public goods are non-excludable. So basically, everybody has access to them and benefits from them. They're usually also non-rival, so which means that they can be used at the same time by a lot of people. Now, you might be wondering, but examples for are the air that we breathe. Like you can't really prevent someone from breathing the air, and just because you're breathing it doesn't mean that your neighbor and your friend can't breathe at the same time, right? Or a traffic light. Just because you see it doesn't mean that the car next to you doesn't see it because you're seeing it, right? So there's a lot of things that are sort of public use, or for example, a public park. Everybody can go into the park and everybody can use it at the same time, as long as it's not too crowded. Same with the ocean. The ocean, just because you're taking a bath in the ocean doesn't mean that someone else can't have a swim as well. Same with lakes. So a lot of natural resources or like our natural environment are public goods that can be used by a lot of people at the same time and where everybody has access to. Now, the problem with public goods, or the questions that come up, are who provides these public goods and who maintains them. For example, a public park. It might be the municipality that provides or secures that public good, and that also maintains it with tax money, for example, right? But that's when we're talking about a local park. What happens if we're talking about the air? What happens when we talk about the oceans, about rivers, about mountains? who looks after them, who maintains them, who pays for it, right? If everybody can use them. So often private actors, so companies or private people, tend to wait for others to provide them, right? So often it's governments, either national governments or local governments, that step in to provide those public goods. And public goods are often financed through taxes, right? Also, a lot of roads are provided by the government. They're also public goods, pretty much, because everybody uses them and everybody has access to them, right? But this also means that you need some sort of mechanism of collective action to provide those goods, because otherwise you probably don't have them, because it's not very likely that someone just says, yes, you can use my private land as a park, and no, you don't have to pay any entrance. Usually that doesn't happen, right? If someone owns land that is nice for hikes, they're gonna maybe offer access to it, but they're gonna ask for an entry price, which then makes it a private good, because then you pay for it, right? And there's maybe a limit in how many people can access. So when it comes to public goods, usually the difficulty is that you need some sort of collective action to provide them. And therefore, public goods tend to be underprovided, because you usually need the government, or at least the local government or municipality, to provide them. There's also another concept that sort of stands in contradiction to the public good, which is what we can call the public bad, which is basically negative public goods, like pollution, for example, that is difficult to assign who exactly is polluting how much, or noise, who is making how much noise, crime. So those are things that are sort of there, and that are difficult to assign or to someone specific, and that therefore are called public bads, right? But this just as a small side note. The important concept here is the concept of a public good, right? Now, when we talk about global public goods, as the word already says, we're talking about public goods that are global. So basically, these are goods whose public is global. So these are public goods that reach across borders, and that can also reach across generation and across population groups, right? They're also non-rival and non-excludable, which makes them public goods. And their benefits are almost universal in terms of countries, right? So they cover more than one group of countries. They're available to a lot of people, preferably even all people, and they often also extend over several generations, so over the current generation and the future generations, right? And this basically makes the whole of humanity the public, or the beneficiary of the global public good. For example, oceans. Many countries, many people have access to it. It's not something that you can exclude, although countries have traced borders even in the ocean, but the water still moves, right? You can't stop it. And if China pollutes the ocean, then the neighboring countries will feel that pollution, because the water is eventually going to get to their shores. Same with the air. The air doesn't really belong to anyone. We all breathe it. We all need it. Future generations are going to need it just as much as we need it. Same with forests, particularly rainforests that provide the oxygen that everybody needs. They are kind of a global public good, because the whole population of the world benefits from them. And also future generations will need to benefit from them, right? Now, in a globalized world, I think we've seen this a lot in the past few weeks, in the past few lectures. A lot of problems are increasingly global, right? Especially environmental problems like climate change are global problems. And that results in a need for increasing international collective action, right? It's not enough if one country does something against climate change and everybody else doesn't. We need everybody to work together, because the problems are globalized. And so in that context, global public goods have become an increasingly important concept in international policy making and in the agendas of a lot of big international institutions like the United Nations, like the International Monetary Fund, World Bank, and also in big non-governmental organizations. Because basically the idea is, if we want to tackle international global problems, particularly environmental problems, the global public good can be a concept that can help. If we declare that the air, clean air, is a global public good, then everybody is responsible to look after it. And then everybody should pay a price for polluting it, for example, right? So that's sort of the idea of the global public good, because everybody depends on it. And no market can exist without global public goods, and no person can exist without global public goods, right? You can be as rich as you want, you're still going to need to breathe oxygen. So the global public good is becoming a concept that is sort of seen as a possible solution to some of those globalized problems, particularly environmental problems. You can read up more. I've put both of the sources there, so you can read up more on the definition of global public good in case this was not specific enough. But I would like to proceed to the examples already. So we have a case study of the wildfires that were spreading in the Amazon. There's two videos. You're gonna find both links in your online activity in your forum as well. So I'm just going to quickly go through them. This is one of them. This is the second one. And then there's a set of questions that you're going to find in your forum discussions as well. They're going to be grouped in different sections, so you can decide which section you want to answer. This just as a very brief introduction to your online activity.